Hello everyone. In this video I want to cover how to submit a clean file. I want to discuss proper topology. We'll talk about layers. We're going to talk about the build history on an object, which is located in the channel box under inputs. We'll also discuss about the outliner and what that is, and naming your object basically. So let's go ahead and just dive right in. I'm going to start by selecting my object. Now the first thing I want to show you is if I go into Windows and I go to my outliner. I have it docked over here, so in case yours isn't, you can just go ahead and sort of drag it over here and dock it. I personally like it that way, so I can always really quickly get back to it if I need to. Now I'm going to show you some things, and this is going to be kind of weird because we already merged this object, right? We totally combined all the vertices on here, so it's all one object, and you'll see just like so. If I double click on a face, if this wasn't all combined and merged and everything, it would only select the faces within here, but since it is, we know it's one full object. So anyway, I want to show you some weird stuff. So in the channel box we have our inputs here, and in our inputs is the build history of this object. So earlier on I had deleted all by type history, but I made sure to keep some information as I was going, and I just want to show you how important this can be. Because if you access your in your outliner, if I were to start selecting on things, you're going to see that this object's not actually selected as if I were to select it like this. But there's a lot of information in this transform history here, and all of this is based off of the build history under inputs in the channel box. So at one point this object, as we know, was just by itself until we combined it, and it has all the transform history and everything like that. But we already know it's one object, so it's kind of weird, and those vertices are merged already. Also here we have another part, all combined and everything. So in here you could, in this sense, you really, how do I explain this? So if I were to just try to delete this in here, you'll notice it can't perform polymerge, blah 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 blah. There's an error happening, and that's because we went ahead and deleted it from there. We don't want to do it like that. The proper way to get rid of this information is to do an edit, delete all by type history, and you'll notice this object no longer has that information. So I'm going to do that one more time under the channel box, under inputs. You see we have all of this information. This is the build history. So I'm going to do edit, delete all by type history, and you'll notice that it deletes those that information there, the transform history, and then you'll notice in the input it is all gone as well. And what that does is it basically bakes down all that information. You'll hear this term bake throughout the semester, but it basically bakes down all of the build history and everything into this object, and it sort of starts on a clean slate from this point. So now everything on here is sort of original, if you will, because we've gotten rid of all the build history. Now sometimes when you're modeling, even when you do an edit delete all by type history, edit delete all by type history, you'll still have some of those weird null objects in there, and if you select on it, in that case usually you'll delete it, and you'll have to take a look and make sure nothing funny is happening in your scene, but there are cases where you literally have to manually go in here and delete some of those objects. So now that I've got that object cleaned up as far as the build history in it and everything, I want to go ahead and I'm going to show you how to name it. I've done this once before, but I'd like to show you again. Well, I'm going to call this sword mesh with an underscore. Now that is important because it's going to do it anyway. I'm going to show you why it is important too here momentarily. So Now that I've got my object named, it makes it much easier to find it and locate it in the outliner. And this becomes really important, especially when you have a lot of objects in your scene. Um, we're going to continue building from this towards our midterm. So you're going to see that we get, there's going to be quite a few objects in this scene. And if you really want to easily locate everything, instead of just navigating like this is another way where you can just go ahead and click on your object in the outliner. And in really large, complicated scenes with tons of meshes and objects and all types of stuff, this becomes extremely useful. So it is good to know how to navigate through the outliner. Now also, there's another way we can organize our scene so we get like a cleaner submission, is by selecting our object. We can go into layers and create layer from selected. So whichever objects you have selected, you could do it that way. And then just double click on here, and I want to show you something. I can't name it the same thing, but I'll show you if I try. I try to do it with the space without the underscore first. And you can always select a different color for the mesh also, so for the wireframe. And I'll show you that in just a second. So if I hit sword mesh, it's going to come up with a warning. It says the name sword mesh is invalid. Valid names only contain alphanumeric characters. The name may not start with a digit. White space characters are not allowed. So in this case, we need to get rid of the space and put an underscore. Now I want to show you something else. If I hit save, it's going to say an object by the name sword mesh already exists. Enter a different name. So you can't have objects in your, even though they're layers and this is an object in your scene, you can't have them be named the same thing because it's going to start to confuse the software, and it already knows that. So we need to come up with something different. So what I typically do is I do sword mesh layer, so I know that's on there. Okay, and then I can change the color. I'm going to change it to black just to show you something, and then I'm going to press OK. And now I selected the black color, but as I've been showing you with shading and wireframe on shaded, you'll see that I have this object now. Instead of the previous blue, whatever color I select will be a different color. So it can definitely help, especially when you have a bunch of different objects in your scene. So let's just say I'm going to just put a sphere in here and drop it over here and do create a layer. And I'm not going to change the name or anything. I'm just going to keep it as it is, but let's just change it to red. So it makes it easier to start to sort of sort through your scene visually if you need to. And I'm just going to delete that layer. But that's one way to also sort of within your scene visually separate objects from one another. I'll turn that off for now. And then the last thing I want to discuss is proper topology. And actually, one more thing before I get into that. I already have this object on 0000. It's called zeroed out. And what that means is it's not entirely zeroed out. It's just translate X, Y, and Z is 0. Rotate X, Y, Z is 0. And then scale X, Y, and Z is 1, 1, and 1. Because you can't have this be 0. Because then it becomes nothing. So we need to keep this at 1. So the term zeroed out is a little ironic because you need to just have translate and rotates at 0 and your XYZ scales at 1. Anyway, now the one thing I want to show you is how to do that manually. And if I go display and grid, I would like to show you, we already know we're at the origin, but let's just say I move it over here and whatever, right? And now I want to freeze transformations. Freezing transformations means zeroing this out, and let's just say I rotate it or whatever. So I got all this information, but this is like the default spot where I want it at all times. It's not going to change without me basically telling it to. You can do Windows, modify and freeze transformations. So now you've basically zeroed out your object. And there's really no way to get it back to the origin once you've done that. But when we start getting objects in our scene, you don't really need to worry about that. But I'm going to go ahead and undo that for now. And if you notice over here, translate X, Y, and Z and rotate X, Y, and Z all have information. So when you're submitting files and you have the objects exactly where you want them to be, you need to do a modify freeze transformations, and that'll zero it out. So I'm going to keep mine here at the origin, modify freeze transformations. And one more thing I can show you really quickly is it probably already is done for us, but if we modify center pivot, let's just say your pivot point's off because of the objects you've been. So I'm going to hold D and just show you if you have. Holding D allows you to adjust the pivot point, and you can adjust it anywhere. But if I hold D and I'm just going to put it off to the side, right? If I wanted, I can center the pivot on it and do modify center pivot, and now it's at directly the center of this object. So anyway, you want to make sure that you have your object with zeroed out with freeze transformations. You want to make sure that the object is named. We're going to have a layer for our object named as well. And then I want to discuss and I recommend having a centered pivot. I'll make that a requirement also. Make sure your object has modify center pivot. And then the last thing I want to discuss and explain, so this is basically everything we need for the submission besides the clean topology. So we built the object through 4 different shapes. We did the base as a down here, this was a sphere, right? This was a cylinder. This started out as a cube, and this section started out as a cube also. Now, the one thing we did after that is we combined all of the objects to make it a watertight mesh. So now we know it's got all of these vertices merged. We we changed the bevels on it, or you may have used the multi-cut tool as I had shown down here. And then we need to make sure excuse me, that we have clean topology. So clean topology is extremely important, and the reason it is I'm going to bring this into one mode real quick. If I go ahead and I grab my multi-cut tool, I got to make sure this object's selected. We need to be able to model quickly and efficiently. You need to be able to add edge loops in like so easily, and that's really one quick way to sort of check and see if you're having some clean topology. You notice how this one goes right around smoothly. If it doesn't go around smoothly like that, you'll see it and you'll know that it's not very clean topology. And it's something having something just like this. Now I'm going to try to do and you'll notice it doesn't work. It won't go all the way around, and that's because of those edges that I just inserted there, which means your topology is off. Even if you have vertices, just the vertices in there, it will throw it all off too. So make sure you have clean topology. The next thing to notice about clean topology, and I'm going to pull up a separate example here, which is a little bit more advanced, but it might visually help. Having these edge loops, in this case they're going around in a circle, this is probably a little bit easier to visually tell. So you see how those go around in a circle? That's clean topology. You'll notice up here these also go around in a circle. So if you click on one edge and you hold shift and you double click the next one, it should select an entire edge loop. And I'm going to press shift I just to show you. You'll notice this selects the entire edge loop wrapping around. So that's how it should be for the entire thing. And then you'll notice here I've got this one going around, and you're going to have different types of edge loops and stuff like that, but as long as it selects entire sections, you'll notice it goes around the entire thing from top to bottom basically, except in this section. This section's automatically a triangle, which is totally fine because I've already discussed triangles are good in certain places, especially a sphere to come to a point and give it that rounder look. However, you could go ahead and change this. I'm not going to go into it, but you could change this all into quads by deleting a couple edge loops or a couple edges here. And if I were to delete these ones, now it's all quads. And now it would sort of select the same exact thing, but just to show you. So quads and triangles are totally fine, because if you remember, this is basically just this. We were basically telling it to be in quads, like, or in triangles there, and now every quad is technically broken into a triangle. This is going back to the before you begin section, where I explain how topology works in Maya. So anyway, I'll go ahead and keep those in there. So anyway, let me show you one more example while I'm at it. So our sword has pretty clean topology, and I always find this to be a great reference in here because it breaks it down by color. And let's go ahead and click on it. Just zoom in. So in here, you'll notice this little, I call it the Robin mask. You'll notice it has clean edge looping going around this way. Around the eyes also, we have this clean, and it's separated in color. These clean edge loops here wrapping around. That is clean topology. And then this one going around the bridge of the nose down around the chin. And then also around the lips. These are all going around in a circle. So same thing, I believe, for the nose. I can't see exactly behind it, but that's more than likely how it's working. And you can see, especially on like this turquoise, the green, or the orange or gold color here, that these edge loops are really important. And if you were to go ahead and select just like this entire edge loop, it would go all the way down, straight through the face, all the way down here. And depending on which one it is, it may even wrap around this part where the Adam's apple would be located and come back up around. So those are just some things to look at, and it might even be this one where it comes down around the Adam's apple and comes back up. But that's just how clean topology works. So you need to make sure that it is clean. And just like with this sword, we have clean topology. Our edge loops just wrap right around, like so, around the blade, around here. So you saw how like that eye was working or whatever. On a face, it's much different. It's much more important. But even on objects that are like cars that don't have that organic deformation when animating, it's still extremely important. So especially to get the right look of the model. So anyway, that's just basically what clean topology is. It's just having nice clean edge loops, and everything more or less is in quads, because objects can always be triangulated later. Things like game engines and certain 3D software will automatically break it into triangles when it's imported. However, we're not going to be worrying about any other softwares, but just so you know, in case you're interested in gaming or VFX or CGI or whatever, that some things do require everything to be triangulated. I'm sure some of you already know that, but quads is primarily what we're looking for as modelers. So making sure that we have these clean edge loops is extremely important on every model that you work on. So anyway, I can't really stress clean topology enough. And one last little quick note is everything I do on this object, you'll notice I have these hard edges here, right? And I want to get rid of those. So soften edges. So I just went ahead and softened the edges on it. On this one, on the blade at least, I'm going to tap 3 really quickly. And I'm just going to quickly grab from here. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. And I'm going to harden these edges. And now, you'll see just when it's in that smooth sort of, or in the regular view, I've got that sharp edge on the blade. But now that I've done that, that information stays stored in here. So anytime you continue to like do something on your scene, and you want to make sure it's clean, edit, delete all by type history. I recommend doing it, you know, every so often. But anyway, that's all I've got for you on this. Don't forget to save your file. Obviously, I would like you to submit the Maya file, and that's about all I've got for you. So, any questions, be sure to message me, and thanks for watching.